And bad morning. Bad morning to everyone. Especially those in Italy. We'll go over that very shortly. Um, Housekeeping. This is brought to you by Brave, the ad resistant, track resistant browsing experience. It's brought to you by the Cash App, a dollar in Bitcoin wallet that you can use with a Visa card. And it's also brought to you by Liberty Mugs, mugs that you can use to consume fluid while also pissing off your coworkers. So feel free to click any of those links and any of the other links in the description to support the channel. Um, that being said, I think we should just get into the shit and start talking about this road bridge collapse in Italy that seems to have claimed some lives and destroyed a lot of careers. It looks like. And also caused major damage to waterway. It looks like I might be
No,
misreading this.
this is a big, massive shit show as far as I'm concerned. Because I saw this break this morning, UK time, and it was 10 deaths. Now it's at about 30. So Italy bridge, Genoa motorway collapse kills about 30. Motorway bridge has collapsed in northwest Italy, the northwest Italian city of Genoa, killing around 30 people as vehicles plummeted to the ground. Interior Minister Matteo Salvi Salvini says. Video footage appears to show one of the towers holding up the bridge collapsing in stormy weather. Vehicle and debris fell 90 meters onto rail tracks in a warehouse. Emergency workers are trying to free people caught in crushed vehicles or rubble and are using sniffer dogs. Some 200 firefighters are among rescue workers at the scene, Mr. Salvini said. Transport Minister Danilo Tonielli spoke of an immense tragedy and France offered Italy its support. Shares in Atlanta, the toll operator which runs much of the country's motorways, fell 6.3% after news of the collapse. French President Emmanuel Macron has tweeted a message of sympathy to the people of Italy, writing in both Italian and French. He said France was ready to offer any necessary aid. How did it collapse? It fell around 11:30 local time, 9:30 GMT. During heavy rain, police reported a violent cloudburst. It was just after 11:30 when we saw lightning strike the bridge. Eyewitness Pietro Malassa was quoted as saying by Italy's ANSA news agency, and then we saw the bridge going down. Another witness, unnamed, recalled, "We heard an incredible roar, and at first we thought it was thunder very close by. We live about 5 kilometers, 3 miles from the bridge, but we heard a crazy bang. We were very scared. Traffic went completely haywire and the city was paralyzed." One image posted by the regional emergency services showed a truck perched at the end of the surviving bridge section immediately before the drop. What do we know of the victims? Giving the death toll of 22, Deputy Transport Minister Edoardo Rixi said the number was likely to rise. A child was among the dead, and at least 13 more people were injured, said the head of Civil Defense Agency, Angelo Borelli. The full horror of the collapse could be seen in aerial video of the scene. The Morandi Bridge, built in the 1960s, stands on an A10 toll motorway, which services the Italian Riviera and the southern coast of France. The missing section was dozens of meters in length and ran across the span of the Polissevera River. It's not acceptable that such an important bridge was not built to avoid this type of collapse, Mr. Rixi was quoted by Reuters news agency as saying. Restructuring work on the bridge was carried out in 2016. The agency reports the highway operator says work to shore up its foundation was being carried out at the time of the collapse, and the bridge was being constantly monitored. And that's pretty much all that we have at the moment on this. So yeah, our hearts and sympathies to all those poor people in Genoa. Honestly, it's terrible.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing you can really say to this. The only thing you can say to this is if you're in the local area and there's a local way that you can help, reach out, see if there's something that you can do for the families in that area. Because I can't. I'm over here in California and I'm low income. But like, if there's something you can do, please do. this is not going to be easy, especially since that infrastructure is going to prevent the existing families from recovering anyway from its collapse here. So
Mm,
it's always, and I mean, I'm not going to play politics here, but I am going to say that this might not have happened if you hadn't looked at your roads as something to crumble. And I hope that infrastructure is looked at and taken more seriously in the future and not just something disposable to be constantly repaired, patched, and replaced.
let's just say let this be a cautionary tale, not just for Italy.
Yeah, for the entire world, your infrastructure needs to be something durable and maybe modular, but certainly not this fragile. Because this stuff happened in America not too long ago too. That bridge collapse that basically fell on a few cars,
Mm,
um, and that killed I think around the same amount of people if I remember correctly. Um,
well, depending on the number of cars, I wouldn't be surprised.
and so
I
like
mean, if
just
you've seen the bridge,
take better care of your infrastructure and
yeah,
take care of the people who are surviving. That's what I have to say.
and if you see the bridge, I mean, if you look at this bridge in Genoa, some of it runs over top of residential areas. I mean, there is quite a lot of land underneath the bridge that is in use by other things, and it's an impressive bridge. But fact is, if it had collapsed somewhere else further down the line, that could have been entire homes and families buried underneath the rubble. Um, I mean, it's bad enough that people trying to get to work were put through all of this, but it could have been a hell of a lot worse.
Yeah. And that's something else good to remember. Even though I'm a pessimist, I do have to temper that with knowing that it could always get worse.
Mm. Remember, it's always darkest just before it gets pitch black, right? Um, so which next? Shall we tackle the latest UK incidents as well while we're at it?
Yeah, yeah, let's stick with that.
All right, so let's stick with the uh, bits of tragedy. Westminster car crash. Man arrested on suspicion of terror offenses. Man is arrested on suspicion of terrorism offenses after a car crashed outside the Houses of Parliament. Vehicle swerved into cyclists and pedestrians shortly after 7:30 British summertime and injuring three people. The suspect in his late 20s is not believed to be known to MI5 or counter-terrorism police and is not cooperating with officers. One woman is being treated in hospital for serious but non-life-threatening injuries. Scotland Yard head of counterterrorism, Neil Basu, said, given that this appears to be a deliberate act, the method, and this being an iconic site, we're treating it as a terror incident. Yet there was no intelligence at this time of further danger to London or the UK as a whole. No one else was in the car, and no weapons have been found. Government's Cobra Emergency Committee is meeting later. The suspect, who has not been formally identified, is being held at a South London police station, and the vehicle is being searched. BBC Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford said sources have told him the suspect is from the Birmingham area. A number of eyewitnesses said the silver Ford Fiesta, which was traveling westbound, appeared to deliberately hit members of the public as it swerved into the opposite lane. Footage released by the BBC shows the moment when the car drove over a pedestrian crossing before crashing into the security barriers. A police officer can be seen jumping over another barrier to get out of the way. Westminster Tube Station was closed for entry and exit, and streets around Millbank and Parliament Square cordoned off for several hours after the crash. The immediate area around the incident remains taped off and screened by white temporary fencing. Parliament is not currently sitting. London Ambulance Service spokesman said two people have been taken to hospital with injuries that are not believed to be serious, while a third patient with minor injuries was assessed at the scene. One of those taken to hospital, a man, has since been discharged. Barry Williams, a BBC member of staff based at Millbank, said, I heard lots of screams and turned around. The car went on the wrong side of the road to where the cyclists were waiting at the lights and plowed into them. Then, then it swerved back across the road and accelerated as fast as possible and hit the barrier at full pelt. He hit at such a speed the car actually lifted off the ground and bounced. Then the police just jumped. The two officers managed to leap over the security barriers, and then armed police vehicles all sped toward the scene. Another witness called Kirsty said a car drove the wrong way around the road, drove through about 20 cyclists and crashed. Jason Williams told BBC Radio 4 uh, the driver had, quote, driven at speed more than 40 miles per hour. He said there was smoke coming out of the car. I saw at least 10 people lying down. I was told basically to move away, to run. I have run for my life. Iwalina Ochab, who also saw the crash, said, I think it looked intentional. The car drove at speed and towards barriers. She said, I was walking on the other side of the road, heard some noise and someone screamed. I turned around and saw a silver car driving very fast, close to the railings, maybe even on the pavement. More than 10 police vehicles and at least 3 ambulances were at the scene outside Parliament, where firearms officers and police sniffer dogs have been searching the area. British Transport Police said it was increasing patrols in England, Scotland, and Wales, and then its officers would be highly visible on trains and stations. And there's there's a fair bit of analysis on this as well, but let's give it our own twist because it's a fairly unbiased piece of reporting. It's actually what the BBC used to be really, really good at. Not really giving you anything necessarily too definitive apart from just the facts, man. And
Well, I mean, that's the facts with a state bias. Because keep in mind, everything's always had a state bias. So thinking it's like unbiased, well, that's basically going to toe the line of its employers is, I don't know. I think that's a little too soon.
It
Not
will
much
toe
too
the
soon.
line up to a point. It'll toe the line up to a point. That's about the best I can say. Eventually, they try to stop towing the line, and they'll stop for a little while, and then they get the chain yanked again. But for the most part, when they do it right, they do it right. And this one's basically not actually painted the one who's been accused as a terrorist. He could just be um, a violent person.
Well, and
But
they're not jumping to conclusions yet, and that is refreshing because when you see this a lot of the time, you see them automatically assuming things about his character, especially in the West, like the U.S. Like you're
oh
seeing
yeah,
so many times somebody will immediately attribute it. This was a violent Trump supporter, or this was a violent ISIS agent, or this was a violent Democrat. You know, they're always trying to paint this whatever guy as somebody, you know, that they can use to justify their hatred of their opponent, rather than just saying, "Hey, this guy did some fucked up shit. Let's assess this guy specifically and individually." You know, because most, and that's the beautiful thing about current discourse. It's sort of a beautiful horror that you see all these people trying to justify their hatred and in doing so ignoring that the vast majority of people don't act the way that they want them to, like fucking immigrants, their political opponents, fucking foreigners like that are bombed overseas. I mean, I've got some news that I'm going to bring up about recent deaths in Iraq, but
up to you if you want to bring it up now.
Oh, well, no, I mean, you wanted to give some analysis to this piece, so I think we should go with that.
That's true. All right, fair enough. So, I mean, I personally am in two minds. I'm not convinced it's a terror attack, uh, especially if there's no indication so far of any activity on that front. And yes, I do think they would pick it up at this point simply because they're spending so much money on tracking everybody's speech online. It'd be kind of hard to miss unless they missed it deliberately. Now, if they did, then that leads to views of potential incompetence and all sorts of stuff. That's a risk that they're very careful to try to avoid over here as much as possible. And this is why when we hear about like the police not putting crimes forward because they may be considered racist, it becomes a bit of a, ooh, that's a bit of a tricky conundrum rather than, well, then stop making it so easy to call everybody racist. They actually think they try to work out, well, how can we keep what we've got while making it better? And eventually they'll realize that they can't keep doing like thought policing all the way around. The best they can do is use it as evidence if a actual crime is committed. But if no actual crime is committed, then effectively no harm, no foul.
Yeah. Well, and on this subject, um, even if he was driving deliberately, it could have just been because he was schizophrenic. And I'd say that the vast majority of these cases of somebody flying off the handle like this, it's not because of any political motive. It's because of an underlying mental health issue. Even when they state a political motive, I think that it's mostly just tacked onto the surface of a bunch of other shit. Because you don't get into that situation without being unhealthy.
Hmm. I will be interested in finding out how far down the rabbit hole this goes, who did it. They're being very cagey about details, as I said, which is, again, refreshing, but it also means that there's very little you can actually analyze here. You can't tell, you can't make any kind of assumption on the person apart from his age and the fact that he's male. So it could be a disgruntled member of the right, or a disgruntled member of the left, or a disgruntled random person from who has no political affiliation whatsoever. We have no idea. We have no idea if it's racially motivated, if it's religious motivations. There's nothing. It's just bloke in his late 20s. And okay, you can't make any kind of group analysis on that, which is,
Yes.
again, quite refreshing
And then
because I
all
don't
these
like making group analysis.
right. Well, and like yet, because you got to know all these fake ass pundits are gonna try and make sure that they get their licks in and try to make this a political issue when it's not. It's an
Oh
issue of
yeah,
mental health.
oh yeah, I'm sure it is. It's not going to be any. It's if it was a political issue, he wouldn't have done it while Parliament wasn't in session. If it was a political issue, he wouldn't have done it. Um, basically, well, a few hours ago, basically, or at the time of day that he did it, which was like 7:30 in the morning.
Right. Yeah.
It's it it seems highly unlikely, just in general, that this is an act of, if it is terrorism, it seems unlikely. And it
Right.
seems equally unlikely that it was some sort of political activism attempt either.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Now, I'm gonna bring up some Middle East news. Um, we got two articles. One is from antiwar.com. It's a very short thing. They do these briefs that you can find that are basically like summaries of who's been killed recently in the global war on terror. And we're talking child injured in checkpoint attack, 6 killed in Iraq. At least 6 people were killed, and 1 child was wounded in a recent violence. The piece is written by Margaret Griffiths. 3 bodies were discovered in the rubble of a blown up house in Sania. It is unclear how long ago the victims had died. In Sinjar, the bodies of 2 young men bearing torture marks were discovered. A child was wounded during an attack on a Bhutanese checkpoint, and security forces killed a militant in Hadar. In other news, the United Nations estimates that between 20,000 to 30,000 Islamic State militants are still in Iraq and Syria, with the number of militants divided up nearly evenly between the two neighbors. So that's what the brief is, and I just wanted to bring that up as a preface to this other one, um, because it's a good reminder, and anti-war does great work. Very very happy to have them on the proper side of history here, in briefing people on how the war on terror is going. And the war on terror is definitely not over yet and definitely ramping up. And it was amazing. Obama said he got rid of ISIS. Trump said he got rid of ISIS. But 20 to 30,000 Islamic State militants are still in Iraq and Syria. Wow, that's amazing. Um, but beyond that, activist post came out with a piece that says airstrike that killed 14 civilians in Afghanistan never happened, says the U.S. This is by Jason Ditz, and it's from antiwar.com. On July 19th, an airstrike hit a number of civilians in Afghanistan's Kunduz province, killing 14 of them. The Afghan government originally took the blame, though later the narrative was revised to U.S. strike. Now U.S. officials say the incident never happened. While it's not unusual for the Pentagon to shrug off reports of civilian deaths and airstrikes by claiming there was no credible information, this is a particularly difficult time to do so because Pentagon officials had already confirmed the attack when it happened. At the time, despite Afghan officials confirming already that everyone was dead was civilian, the Pentagon claimed all 14 were, quote, Taliban fighters. This was particularly ridiculous since several were young children. Only one was only 3 years old. The army is claiming to have reviewed Afghan government findings too, which the Afghans made clear at the time concluded the incident happened and civilians were killed. It's not at all clear how the Pentagon can justify going from that to denying the incident happened at all.
Perhaps one of them had a senile moment. I really don't know at this point. It's a bit of a backwards on the narrative that they usually do, which this is the order you're supposed to do it, Pentagon. You deny first, then you say there's no credible evidence, then you say it's all militants. You do it in that order. You don't do it in reverse because then you just look like a fucking moron. Well, there's a reason why you have that pattern.
But they don't look like a moron to me. They look like liars and corruption officials. I mean...
Well, it's little column A, little column B, mate.
Yeah,
I mean, they look like liars and corruption officials the other way, but they don't look like morons. This way, they look like that and morons.
Yeah, but I don't think they're doing it because they're stupid. I think that this is a very specifically keyed-in move. I mean, why would they do this if they didn't have a reason, when there's already been confirmatory evidence?
Maybe to highlight this specific incident as an issue of malfeasance, because that's the only thing this kind of action actually would do. That order is very odd.
Or maybe
because it's the opposite of what it normally would be.
Or maybe, well, I mean, normally maybe by like a factor of over 50%, but plenty of people actually do deny. I could find countless articles that I've read where somebody's denying something that actually happened. I'm
not saying that they don't do that.
Hold on. I'm saying that they already knew actually happened, that the news already confirmed actually happened. There are plenty of incidents where officials have tried to make it seem as though it didn't happen, like covering up history that's already been made public. Especially since they can claim that their sources weren't verified, that they went with bad information, all of this, fucking managerial bullshit. And if you start looking at that this way, it starts to look more and more like there's something involved in this story they don't want people looking at. So they're starting to say it didn't happen rather than, and most people will just say, yeah, okay, I guess it never happened. They found that out. Most people don't do the digging, and they want people to not dig. It seems like it doesn't seem like incompetence to me, as though you normally want me to assume it is. It seems like malintent, and it seems like they're trying to cover something up that's inconvenient to one of their narratives.
I consider all of those actions usually to be malintent based. I've considered the specific one to be both malintent and moronic. That's my point. Because it's only because of the order of declarations was inverted. Because normally when they deny, yes, they deny after the fact in some cases, but they don't say that, yes, there were militants first, and then go, well, no, actually, it never happened. That I've not seen before.
It's definitely happened before. They shuffle around paperwork. They burn documents. They say it never happened. You can. This is the thing. They can unperson somebody. They could unperson me. They could get me on the Smith Act, revoke my citizenship, burn my childhood school records, the only people who would know I existed were my family. And the internet would probably not look very deeply into me since fucking I pissed off all the people who are on the left and right who normally look into this sort of stuff. They could fucking end me and anybody else at any point because they have access to all this information and most of it's digital. It's not, they've made it easier than ever to burn somebody, and they could burn any one of us. So, yeah, they could claim this incident never happened and then conclusively prove the incident never happened using currently available documents. They could show a ledger that they burned some of the entries from that says, hey, we went to all these different places, but we didn't go there, and we didn't blow that place up, and those people didn't die. That must have been a crossed wires report or something. Stop looking, good boy.
No, I get what you're trying to say, mate. I just find this one again, if you can find another incident where they sort of followed the trend of it was a successful militant attack to then saying the attack didn't actually happen in the first place. That order. If you can find another one of them, I'd be.
It wouldn't need to be a militant attack, but it would definitely need to be something like where they said something happened and then they eventually did a 180 on it and said it didn't. It would definitely have to be that, but it doesn't have to be a militant attack.
All right. Say something happened, and then that they did, and that they were basically claiming credit for, and then to deny that the event occurred. That's the main thing for me. I'd need to see another example of that to say that this is a consistent pattern, not just somebody goofed and now it's going to come to bite them in the ass. Because this is the kind of shit we're waiting for, mate. This is the kind of thing we can use really heavily against the state when they do it really wrong, because it highlights how corrupt they've become now. To the point where they can't even follow their own policies properly. And there's reasons behind those policies. It's to give them plausible deniability.
Of course, let's be real specific here. Like, my particular bias, I don't think that they've become more corrupt. I just think that they've got better at doing the corruption they were designed for.
That's an interesting way of phrasing it. I don't consider the two to be mutually exclusive.
Well, I do. The system was always designed for doing this. It's not like it was designed purely and then suddenly a bunch of corrupting influence got in and corrupted it. It's
that's fair enough. It is by design corrupt. That I will give you 100%. But speaking of corruption, shall we discuss the funny thing that happened on the way to the FBI investigation?
I mean, yes, absolutely. But one moment, we've got a few comments that we should relay in chat here.
Right.
So your mother says she quit Twitter. Finian says he's tempted to do the same. Danielle says, my question would be, if it proves to be, quote, terrorism, will they honestly report that? Oh, no, they won't. And they won't honestly report it, because even if it is terrorism, they'll always politically slant it. And they'll always try to make it seem like the terrorism was either on their opponent's side or not that big a deal. So, because that's the way it always goes. Finian says, yeah, go ahead.
I'm pretty much in agreement with you on that 100%. I don't expect us to find out all the motivations. I expect some kind of narrative to come out of this. Yeah, a lot of obfuscation. And it'll take somebody who's actually interested in the subject to do a lot of actual investigative journalism to dig into it properly.
Right, which is why the lapdog press should be a watchdog press, but, fucking good luck with that.
There are a few out there, but they're individual reporters, not actual full entities usually that do that.
Oh, like I cannot chill for Abby Martin hard enough. She's fantastic.
I was thinking of Robert, I think it's Robert Fisk of The Independent, who
Yeah,
basically
he's not
blew the
bad.
lid on he blew the lid on Syria, and he's still blowing the lid on Syria, basically saying, why are all of these US munitions in ISIS hands? Please, somebody explain this to us, because these look like they've been directly sold to
Right,
them.
but that's the thing. Abby's one of the few journalists that would be willing to have somebody like him on, and in fact, I think she might have had him on. I'm not exactly
Mm.
sure. I'll have to check about that.
But yeah,
Um,
let's hit up the next lot on that front.
um, all right. Finian says
Uh,
it's his genius is the war on drugs. We'll never run out of a drug war to war against. We will never run out of people to call terrorists. Classifying everyone killed as combatants cleans up the Mets. Yeah, definitely.
yeah, Andy Hamilton said it best in Old Harry's game. You can't win the war on terrorism because an abstract noun can't surrender. Same thing's true for the drug war, by the way. It's also an abstract noun. Um, so these abstract noun wars we've been waging against poverty, war, all sorts of things. Funnily enough, they don't tend to end with the goal they have in mind.
Well, the goal that they publicly state
Oh,
anyway.
all right. Yeah, they don't end as advertised. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, definitely. Your mileage may vary. Um, Daniel says, particularly in the UK, they always seem to want to cover up for their bad immigration decisions, in my opinion. Oh yeah, definitely. And they want to make it seem as though the immigrants are the problem rather than making it seem as though, hey, we shouldn't have a welfare state. Like
I think
I made this comment on Twitter that let me see if I can pull that up. That
while you pull that up quickly, can I just add a caveat there? I think some of this may be a bit more complicated than people first presume, because I need to do some research on history regarding particularly Saudi Arabia and Britain, because I know for a fact back in the 70s they had a very, very cushy relationship with Arab nations. And that could be something that's now being reflected within the society itself.
maybe, but at the same
I'd need to
time,
do research. I need to do some research on that, though. So I'll leave that one for a later date.
yeah, just sort of hanging in the air.
Mm,
Um, but at the same, like my tweet was, I'd be amazed that so many right wingers believe a wall and increased ICE presence is the solution to the welfare state, which grows government and is expensive. Instead of ending the welfare state entirely, hugely shrinking government. But what can
mm.
you expect from xenophobes collecting benefits? So it's like, I mean, yeah, you oppose immigration. Like the right opposes immigration, but only because they won't deal with the problems that cause people to want to immigrate, which aren't the
Yeah.
better society. It's not like they don't like their culture, otherwise they'd assimilate. It's the welfare state. It's
Mm,
the idea that um that you have a place that they can come to get all the resources that they need, and all they have to do is take a road trip,
mm.
and avoid a few checkpoints, and then combine that with the fact that the warfare state has been putting essentially Europeans where they shouldn't be for a very long time, immigrating bases for Western nations all around the fucking globe, and the huge military presence that every European nation has in almost every traditionally black and brown nation. And the fact is that the immigration problem is twofold. Just one's in a uniform, and not to
Mm.
mention the fact that like when these people do that, they do it to blow up places, and somehow that displaces people and causes a huge amount of economic unrest. And then suddenly, hey, you know, it seems like there's a lot of terrorism here. I wonder why.
I've never
Um,
understood the logic of inviting the people you've just bombed into your country.
Well,
That
because
one
they
I
want a
don't get.
perpetual warfare state and a perpetual security state to make sure that nobody rises up. It's a self-cleaning vacuum.
Yeah, that's one way of managing it, I suppose, but it still seems fucking stupid
Well, and
from
I
a
realized
tactical
this the other day.
perspective.
if that dark triad test online is correct, um, the reason I think this way, and that I think that the elites think this way, is because I think like they do. So, if the dark triad test is correct, I'm pretty much a narcissistic Machiavellian psychopath. And I've found ways to manage that, possibly, but I'm good at thinking like they do, and so you know it's easier for me to grasp corruption and evil than it is for a lot of other people. A lot of other people might just look at it as an insulative factor, like fucking Aurelian of Rome here, who says that I'm ignoring human psychology, when in fact I'm highlighting human psychology and saying maybe we shouldn't pay for the negative aspects of it so that it breeds and reproduces and then is coddled by a negative influence from cradle to grave. Maybe that's the problem. Nah, and then we shouldn't, fucking also have a conversation about the massive problems that immigration was caused by, not that immigration causes. No, we
Yeah,
shouldn't look at the roots of the cause. We should just look at these bad brown people that are coming into white places.
well, it's a common misconception that immigration is a causal factor. It's not. It's an emergent problem. If people are leaving one place for another place, there's reasons why they leave in the first place, and there's a reason why they pick the new location. I immigrated for reasons of my own that weren't influenced by anything but my own circumstances. But other people are doing it specifically because they see an opportunity that can to improve um their status and not necessarily anything else. They're
Right.
not doing it because they want to be here. They're doing it because they want what's best for them. And if that means they are going to be here, then so be it. But they will try to still make it the best for them.
Right.
And I'm not going to fault somebody for doing that. But if it then means that I have to change, we got a problem.
Right. And speaking of that problem, Danielle responds, "Why turn down dollars when you don't have to do anything to get it?" And yep, that's pretty much what the welfare state is. I
Yep,
mean,
100%.
there are countless people who've made it a tool to get up, and those people are more admirable than the average. But at the same time, it's definitely a systemic problem. And the systemic problem is that it's coming from money that nobody had to work for, so nobody's attached to the costs of welfare. Like the government workers, they just had it printed. They had the social services paid for by essentially government stimulus from a Fed level. And what?
I was just going to say, I rarely quote Rothbard, but he was right on one thing in particular. You can either have a welfare state or you can have open borders. You really can't have both. It's not an
Right.
option.
But like that's the thing, you get rid of the welfare state first, and then these
Yeah.
programs where it's funded by stimulus essentially, and maintained by continued stimulus, and then after that, everybody involved in the program is just out to get that stimulus by the minimum possible work. It's not going to change anything positively, at least on a general scale, because the average person doesn't have anything to change. And then, by the way, the whole issue of welfare is another ball of wax entirely, because you're dealing with like essentially an organization to keep the lower classes from rising up, to keep them sedated. And they won't pay attention to the fact that fucking their pensions were gutted, and that social security was like stolen from, and that inflation means that their savings are worthless, and that they're being taxed and regulated into oblivion if they're on enough welfare that they don't feel like anything bad is happening. And that's exactly what it's for. It's designed to prevent crime and recidivism and ultimately revolution. Let them eat cake. Panem et circenses.
Yeah. Well, I think we can probably um,
Yeah. Let's
go
move on
on
to the
to the.
FBI.
Let's move on to the FBI now, because this is it's tying in again, and to everybody watching, and this is going to be sort of a tale of two narratives style of presentation. So the first one's coming from the BBC, titled "FBI Agent Peter Strzok Fired Over Anti-Trump Texts." A veteran FBI agent who exchanged anti-Trump text messages with a during the election has been fired from the FBI, his lawyer has said. Peter Strzok has been accused by Republicans of being biased against Donald Trump and seeking to prevent his election victory. Mr. Trump has pointed to the text exchanges as evidence of bias in the special counsel's Russian probe. Mr. Strzok served on the Russian probe and the Hillary Clinton email inquiry. Mr. Strzok's lawyer, Etienne Goldman, said in a statement that FBI Director David Bowditch ordered the firing on Friday. He said the sacking overruled a decision by the head of the FBI employee discipline, who determined that Mr. Strzok should only face a demotion and a 60-day suspension. Quote, the decision to fire Special Agent Strzok is not only a departure from typical Bureau practice, but also contradicts Director Christopher Wray's testimony to Congress and his assurances that the FBI intended to follow its regular process in this and in all personnel matters, Mr. Goldman said in a statement on Monday. This decision should be deeply troubling to all Americans. A lengthy investigation and multiple rounds of congressional testimony failed to produce a shred of evidence that Special Agent Strzok's personal views ever affected his work. A spokesman for the FBI told the BBC that they could not immediately comment on Mr. Strzok's firing. Mr. Trump took to Twitter on Monday to ask when the inquiry into Russians' alleged meddling in the 2016 election, which is being led by ex-FBI Director Robert Mueller, will end. Agent Peter Strzok was just fired from the FBI finally. The list of bad players in the FBI and DOJ gets longer and longer, he tweeted. And one of his tweets actually takes credit for firing Strzok, which is a bit interesting. But okay. In another tweet, he called the inquiry into Hillary Clinton's email server a, quote, sham investigation, saying it was, quote, a total fraud on the American public and should be properly redone. During the election, Mrs. Clinton was investigated by the FBI over use of a private email server to handle sensitive government documents during her time as Secretary of State. Mr. Strzok exchanged text messages that disparaged Mr. Trump. Really does frustrate me that, just as an aside, it should be President Trump, because that is his title now. It's not Mr. With FBI lawyer Lisa Page, with whom he was having an affair. In one exchange, Miss Page asks, Trump is, quote, not ever going to become president, right? Right? Mr. Strzok responds, no, he won't. We will stop it. Mr. Trump has attacked the two FBI lovers as recently as last Saturday. Quote, so many of the great men and women of the FBI have been hurt by these clowns and losers. In a heated congressional hearing last month, Mr. Strzok, a 21-year veteran of the FBI, asserted that there was no evidence of bias in my professional actions. He was repeatedly attacked by Republican lawmakers and expressed significant regret for the texts. Under FBI regulations, agent may express political opinions as an individual. It's not clear whether these texts were sent from work phones. Amid Republican criticism last year, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein said he was confident the special counsel team was being run appropriately. Mr. Rosenstein also knows the FBI had rules against checking a person's politics during the hiring process. We are not going to improperly consider political affiliation with our career employees. Mr. Strzok is the third high-profile FBI employee who had been involved in the Russian and Clinton investigations to be fired since Mr. Trump took office. FBI Director James Comey was fired by Mr. Trump, who later said he had been thinking of the Russian inquiry when he had made his decision. His deputy, Andrew McCabe, was removed by Attorney General Jeff Sessions after an inspector general determined that he had made unauthorized links to the press about the Clinton investigation. So that's the BBC's take on Strzok. But that's not the only one that exists out there. because according to sarahcarter.com and to Sarah Carter herself, she knows the real reasons why Peter Strzok was fired from the FBI. And but I'd like to get your thoughts on what the BBC was saying.
Well, I think essentially, and this is from my decidedly narrow understanding of the Peter Strzok case. Um, if you have an agent inside the government which is supposedly supposed to be legitimate, criticizing part of what makes that agency supposedly legitimate, it does sort of remove part of the point of them being there. If you look at this from a modern perspective of, well, he said he wouldn't do that, or, well, it's not very nice. Well, it doesn't seem very much, wrong to keep him on. To kick him off. But from a perspective of, the modern day, where you're dealing with essentially proto-fascism in like its inception here, it makes sense to only have one voice in the room, and he's definitely not that voice. So I don't see a single way that it doesn't make sense to sort of remove him from any sort of investigation, as long as we're dealing with corruption. And if we're dealing with corruption, then it makes 100% sense to understand and analyze this from the perspective of essentially mobs, and the fact that they have to protect their own and protect their image before anything else. If that, because I know that statement was rambling, but it's also because I'm multitasking right now.
Fair enough. Now I've done a bit of I've been following the Strzok affair to a fair extent, and it's an intriguing one because it's got all the makings of a great political scandal. There's loads of sex, lies, political espionage, use of suspicious warrants and suspicious data to try and honey trap somebody, and all sorts of interesting bits of intrigue and unusual activity has been going on around Strzok or involving Strzok directly. And I find it shocking that nobody outside of the right is biting for this. So you start looking at it deep and you start realizing why, and it's because of the political views that he has. And so you have to start wondering, well, no, you can't just say this man has no bias. You have to really question it and see if his actions show that he has no bias. And his actions at the moment don't really demonstrate that. But I believe Sarah may be able to shed some light on why, because she says she knows the real reasons Peter Strzok was fired from the FBI. There's certainly more than just the anti-Trump text messages sent by former FBI Special Agent Peter Strzok that led the second in command at the FBI to fire him. FBI Deputy Director David Bowditch actually overruled a recommendation by the Bureau Office of Professional Responsibility to suspend and demote the former senior agent, and instead terminated Strzok on Friday. But what could have led the FBI Director, David Bowditch, to make the decision to overrule OPR? Why didn't FBI Director Christopher Wray take charge and fire Strzok himself? And more importantly, why would OPR recommend Strzok, who was charged with handling the investigation into alleged collusion between President Trump's campaign and Russia, only receive a 60-day suspension and demotion? A statement to SarahAcarter.com on Monday, the FBI said Mr. Strzok was subject to the standard FBI review and disciplinary processes after conduct highlighted in the IG report was referred to the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility, OPR. OPR reviewed the investigative materials as well as written and oral responses of Mr. Strzok and his counsel and issued OPR's decision, the Deputy deputy director, as senior career FBI official, has the delegated authority to review and modify any disciplinary findings and or penalty as deemed necessary in the best interests of the FBI. Former FBI special agents, some of whom worked with OPR for years, said they agreed with Bowditch's decision. They told SarahACarter.com that the system is broken and Bowditch had no other choice but to step in and fire Strzok. They said political leanings, friendships, and dual systems of justice inside OPR have plagued how cases regarding FBI agents are adjudicated and handled. Quote, Strzok was under oath before Congress, and he made statements that appeared to be false and refused to answer some questions, but he was going to get just a slap on the wrist, said a former supervisory special agent from OPR adjudication, who spoke on the condition of anonymity due to the nature of their work. There's absolutely no wiggle room when it comes to lack of candor in the FBI, unless you're an SES, Senior Executive Service. Strzok's firing went well beyond texting about Trump. Strzok would have also been involved in the handling of FISA and the FISA application to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, the FISC. The agent noted that Strzok was, quote, well aware that he was lying by deception when they did not include the information on who paid for the dossier, and that Bruce Orr was back-channeling information for a discredited source. Strzok knew that they were putting the application in the right context, unquote, the former FBI supervisory special agent added. If there was the slightest doubt that the application was not 100% true, then that application would not go forward. The agent continued, quote, I find it absolutely preposterous that former Deputy Director Rod Rosenstein is still in his position, knowing that he signed off on the final FISA application. Rosenstein oversees the special counsel investigation after DOJ Attorney General Jeff Sessions recused himself from the case. He signed off on the final FISA warrant in the spring of 2017, allowing the FBI to continue spying on former Trump campaign volunteer Carter Page. The FBI official said that Rosenstein should have been aware of the, quote, lack of information contained in the application. During a House hearing in June, Rosenstein noted that he doesn't read through all the applications that are brought for his signature, saying it depends on the circumstances. Another former FBI official said they were stunned when OPR, critical of Strzok's text messages, only recommended a 60-day suspension and demotion. Strzok, who testified before lawmakers in July, said he did not allow his political views to interfere with his investigations. I'm a bit emotional right now after hearing what OPR proposed for Strzok, said Robert Gitz, a former FBI supervisory special agent who's been fighting the Bureau for years. Gritz, who served 16 years in the Bureau, said she was targeted by senior FBI officials, including now fired FBI Director Andrew McCabe, for filing a harassment claim against one of her supervisors. I lost everything, she said. However, the retired FBI supervisory special agent from OPR adjudication said it was widely known within the department that some senior officials were adamant supporters of former President Barack Obama and also supported Hillary Clinton for president. OPR is headed by Candace Will, a former DOJ official. She could not be reached immediately for comment. Will was appointed to the head of the OPR in August 2014 by then FBI Director Robert Mueller, who is now leading the special counsel investigation into the alleged collusion between Trump campaign and Russia. Prior, she joined the DOJ in 1988, and in 1994, she was assistant counsel in the Justice Department Office of Professional Responsibility, according to her biography on FBI.com. I saw political decisions made while I was there in office. There was a political culture that was hard to shake, said the former FBI official with OPR, noting that there were approximately 14 to 16 adjudicators. Most of the people there, the adjudicators, are former DOJ officials or attorneys hired off the street. There were very few FBI special agents working in OPR. The agents would look at things differently. It almost makes me ashamed when I tell people I was an FBI agent, said the former official. I was so proud of the Bureau, but it grieves me to see what it's become. So that's the other take. And from my perspective, this is a far more balanced view of the situation. From the text messages and the connections and the activities involved that Strzok was responsible for, it is very difficult to believe that he is, as he asserts, without proof, unbiased. There is ample evidence that he was biased against Trump. both before and after the election. There
Right.
is evidence that he assisted in an attempt to spy on a sitting president and a number of other things that under I'd say a democratic leader at this point would not be allowed.
Well, right, but keep in mind this is the way it works in terms of politics. The new guy gets in and cleans up, quote, after the old guy. So obviously Trump has to get people in line with him, um, and fire the people in line with Obama and people like Hillary. He has to, and like this has to happen under the guise of credibility. So it has to look like it's because of text messages. And you know,
Well,
it could
the
have been
text
because of
messages
that.
have been confirmed there and are legitimate, and the
Well,
other
no,
half of
I recognize that,
the
and
other
I,
half of the equation has been very cooperative, according to
right,
the people interviewing in Congress.
right, and but what I'm saying is that like the texts would have been enough alone, and they've also got all this other stuff, and the bias here for Hillary and Obama, if this article bears out the facts and isn't just somebody being partisan, because that's something that you can fall into a lot of traps with, especially when you're starting to discuss like conservatives under this basically conservative controlled government. um you're discussing people who have a decent amount of history of making it seem as though their enemy is like all powerful even when they're in pretty much 100% power. I mean, that's like you've got to realize like every major governmental branch right now seems to be under Republican control. And when you have that
Political. There's a distinction.
well, right. But when you end up with that, any element that isn't will be automatically derided by the political establishment. And he's definitely not a Republican. And he definitely did use that in terms of bias as far as I'm concerned. But at the same time, you got to know that that isn't all that matters here, and that he's being fired specifically because they want a party line towed and he didn't tow it. So they're throwing him under the bus, which is what I've been saying for a while now.
I would say it's a little bit, I would say it's more than just throwing somebody under the bus for, or what would be basically a patsy. Let's say this guy isn't just a fall guy. I
Well, I
don't
didn't
want
say he
to,
was just a fall guy. I said that's what he was, though. I didn't
I
say that that's
consider,
all he was. But that
personally,
doesn't mean that's not also what he is.
I consider Strock to be the first of many proper dominoes to fall in the near future. We'll see how many actually go, how many actually topple over, but he's the first one of many. And now that he's no longer a member of the FBI, he may wind up actually facing something a bit more serious in once investigations into those FISA warrants get completed, because
Right.
that is
Well,
something that is going to bite a lot of people in the bureaucracy quite hard. I mean,
yeah.
the, people need to understand quickly before we sign off that yes, the government at the moment is heavily controlled by the Republican Party from a political perspective. But if anybody hasn't watched it, you can watch it on Netflix. It's called Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister. I recommend you watch them. It tells you all you need to know about British civil service. And if you think it doesn't work that way in the US, you are sorely mistaken. There is basically another branch of government, and it's called the civil service. And in the US, it is called state officials, or basically anybody who is an agent of the state. And that civil service has its own rules, has its own political nuances, and it has its own way of playing. And they don't believe the politics. because if they did, they'd have to all be stark raving schizophrenics. So they have to believe in something more baseline. And the ones that do believe in the politics don't work well as civil servants. They work well as people who are easily corrupted by a party. And that is what you see with Strzok when you analyze it through that kind of lens of civil service versus political party. It becomes this civil servant has dislikes this person, and by guilt by association, the party he is now affiliated with. So he will work against both in tandem, but him in particular.
Or maybe, go ahead.
The one other thing is when your boss is the guy you're trying to take down, you've got to make sure that everybody in the chain above you is in lockstep with you, and there is no dissent amongst any of them. Don't think that's going to be possible if people are saying that within the FBI that your methods on certain investigations were, to put it mildly, questionable.
Okay, well, and I can see where you're coming from with that, but I hope you also see the sort of thing that I'm discussing here is A, having a sacrificial lamb to say, see, we're rooting out corruption. That's what Trump likes to say a lot of the time, and it's what he does, and it's what he's done. And he has a long series of people fired under his administration, not the least of which is this, I forget her name right now, but this woman who recorded her firing and recorded Trump's reaction to it, where he was like, gosh darn it, before it later being revealed that he actually was in on it and wanted it to happen. While he said he didn't want it to happen to her over the phone, that she has recorded. I mean, this is an administration that will burn people for the sake of burning them so that they can point to other people and say, you don't want to end up like Strzok, do you? That's what it is. It's intimidation and it's sacrificial lambs. And that's all. As far as I'm concerned, that's exactly what this is. And you know, I've yet to be persuaded otherwise, even in this particular instance, because
Fair
like
enough.
you want to bring up Yes Minister. Well, I'll counter your Yes Minister with a house of cards.
Similar principle, though, actually, in both cases. The
Sure.
the political staff have their own game plans. Some of them are loyal, most of them aren't.
Yeah, well,
And that's the key point.
It's the fact that this administration thrives on loyalty, party unity, and a single voice, which is fascism, by the way.
No, I agree, but
And that makes that suspect to me. It seems to me that the greater story here, and I'm not being binarist either. I'm not saying that there isn't elements of what you're saying, but what I am saying is that the primary ingredient in this sauce and the most flavorful one is the fact that the administration wants to protect its image and its party line.
I will concede that they will try to do that to an extent. I don't think, put it this way, time is the only thing that will tell which of us is right on this. Because you believe it is simply a power play. I believe it's something a bit more deep.
Yeah,
and
well,
we'll see what winds up happening in the future in more instances of bad morning news when if and when more people wind up either getting fired, resigning, or getting arrested. There've been a lot of them lately.
Or found in a closet with a belt around their neck.
Yeah, possibly suicided as well. There are a few investigators say, "Ooh, I missed that one. We'll have to do that one tomorrow." There was an investigator into a lot of the scandals related to the Clinton family, or specifically Hillary during her time in the State Department, who mysteriously died recently. And I'll need to pull up an article on that for tomorrow.
All right. Well, I think that's a fairly good segue into tomorrow. So, everybody, have a bad morning. Bad morning to y'all. Smash the state and fuck the system.
Have a bad morning, everybody.